what the purpose is. The purpose, as discussed on the BBC this morning or from others, is that it's an attempt to deter. In other words, it's a warning before the fact to Assad. We can see that you're loading chemical bombs onto aircraft, and we want to tell you that you shouldn't use them. You shouldn't drop those bombs, because if you do, we're going to come after you again. And who knows what that could mean? It could mean something like the following, right? We're getting all these news reports that Kim Jong-un of North Korea, right, the DPRK, is very much afraid of a SEAL team coming to his presidential palace in Pyongyang or elsewhere in North Korea and killing him, assassinating him. And you could think of the distances and, of course, the geographic relations in Syria. There's a civil war. You could imagine some attempt to attack Assad personally, right? And actually, we condemn this. This would be absolute insanity. Because if you do that with Assad, right, that's not only a crime in its own right, but that's going to cause tremendous chaos, and you might succeed in reviving ISIS, which right now is pretty much on its last legs. So there's the story, the public story is the U.S. is trying to deter Assad from a war crime. In reality, I would put together some very obvious things. Right now, we have the Gallup poll. The Gallup poll is the most recent poll. Gallup, of course, is the gold standard of polls, right? It's the classic poll. This was, the first polling organization, really, back in the 1930s. And for whatever it's worth, their poll is that Trump's approval has now sunk to 36%. 36% think he's doing a good job. 58% think he's doing a bad job. So it's a 22% gap between 1/4 and 1/5 of voters and adults, I guess this one is adults, think that Trump is doing a bad job. And you'll remember that we've been working with this hypothesis from the CBS Nation tracker that it's 20% hardcore Trump supporters, 20% Trump fellow travelers looking for advantages, rewards, jobs, 20% undecided, neutral, curious about Trump, maybe still waiting to see something positive, but not favorable, in many cases tending towards hostile, sort of mixed. And then the big group, the it's actually 40% by now, the 40% who are hardcore anti-Trump. So notice, the 40% is bigger than any of these by a 2-to-1 margin. And we've been seeing that there's been attrition among the hardcore Trump people. The true believers have gone down a couple of points. I think it's also largely a matter of the curious group, right? The neutral group migrating over into the hardcore anti-Trump. So this is trouble, 36%. And that 36%, we've had other polls, Quinnipiac had Trump down to 34%. And there have been a couple of series where the anti-Trump opinion disapprove is up to 60%. So you're getting close to 1/4 of the electorate, which represents the difference, right, between the pro-Trump and the anti-Trump. We also have the Congressional generic ballot, right, to put some of this stuff in perspective. The generic ballot is without reference to your specific congressional district or your congressman, congresswoman, which party ought to control the Congress. And it's a Democratic lead of 8%. 8% sounds like a lot. Unfortunately, the way this stuff is gerrymandered, we've got these rural Republican states that have the gerrymandered districts. It's estimated that the Democrats would have to get up to 10% to begin really doing damage to the Republican majority in the House. But this is it's all within reach, right? This is all eminently feasible. So don't be demoralized by Ossoff. Just remember that in that district, there was a shift of about 15% from the Republican column to the Democrat, right? This should have been Handel winning going away. And that's despite these reports we're getting, which we hope to talk about later in the show, about, frankly, vote fraud, what anybody would call vote fraud in terms of stacking the deck in the 6th Congressional District. One of the big things was kicking people off the rolls, right? Denying people the right to register and therefore the right to vote. So you don't have to wait till votes are cast and then interfere with the counting. You prevent them from being cast by interfering, right? And of course, Russia does their part, and Russia therefore takes part in a racist operation, right? And I think the American black community has gotten the message, where the mushhead liberals, right, the alt-left, don't seem to have figured this out. But maybe that will change. So the other thing, in addition to the polling, what's the immediate sort of tactical situation? Well, we have Mitch McConnell's monstrosity, right, this health bill, which could be in trouble. I don't know. This is harder to say. Anytime you're basing a calculation on what Republicans say in public, right, then it's very iffy, right? You're really on shifting sands, because any of these people could flip within 2 minutes, right? They're utterly unprincipled. They believe in absolutely nothing except their own career ambition, perhaps money, power, their own careers as the key to both. Bear that in mind, right? Caveat the whole thing, as Al Haig would have said. But the idea is, it looks like there's at least a certain chance that this Mitch McConnell health bill may fail. So, isn't it plausible to think that Trump and company are attempting now to build a diversion operation, which would have two features? One would be to increase the chances that they could get the health bill through by diverting attention. In other words, by getting a circus going and some kind of confrontation and shooting in the Middle East, right? If you had a bunch of cruise missiles launched, that seems to lead to a little uptick, right? A bounce for the presidency. So you could do that. That might push your health bill over the top, right? It might change the mind of some senator, or give a senator cover saying, I couldn't vote against Trump because he's a national hero, the way he's standing up to Assad of Syria and so forth. So one would be to make it more likely that the health bill would go through. And the other side would be, if it doesn't go through, you've at least got something else going, right? You can shift attention, lift and shift your attention over to that. So isn't that obvious? That's what I put out last night. When I heard this stuff, it really started to stink to high heaven in my nostrils anyway.